Have you ever felt like you're standing in your own way? Like no matter how hard you try, something inside you keeps holding you back? What if I told you that the very thing stopping you from achieving your dreams is also the key to unlocking your greatest potential? In The Mountain Is You, Brianna Wiest reveals how self-sabotage isn't your enemy. It's a signal that you're ready to grow, to transform, and climb the mountain within yourself. Today, we're diving deep into this life-changing book. By the end of this video, you'll understand why you self-sabotage, how to stop it, and how to turn your biggest obstacles into your greatest strengths. Let's get started. Before we can overcome self-sabotage, we need to understand what it is and why it happens. Brianna Wiest explains that self-sabotage isn't about being lazy or unmotivated. It's a survival mechanism. Our brains are wired to protect us from pain, even if that pain is necessary for growth. For example, if you've ever procrastinated on a big project or avoided a difficult conversation, it's because your brain is trying to shield you from discomfort. But here's the catch. Growth happens outside your comfort zone. Self-sabotage is your brain's way of saying, this feels risky. Let's stay safe. The problem is, staying safe often means staying stuck. Wiest compares self-sabotage to standing at the base of a mountain. The mountain represents your goals, your dreams, and the life you want to create. But climbing it feels scary. So instead of taking the first step, you find ways to distract yourself or convince yourself it's not worth it. But here's the truth. The mountain isn't your enemy. It's your greatest teacher. And the only way to grow is to start climbing. Deeper dive. Let's break this down further. Self-sabotage often manifests in ways that seem harmless or even productive. For instance, you might over-prepare for a task to the point where you never actually start it. Or you might focus on perfecting one small detail while ignoring the bigger picture. These behaviors are sneaky because they give the illusion of progress. But in reality, they're just ways of avoiding the discomfort of taking real action. Another common form of self-sabotage is self-criticism. When you constantly tell yourself you're not good enough, you create a mental barrier that prevents you from trying. It's like standing at the base of the mountain and convincing yourself you'll never make it to the top. So why even try? The key to overcoming self-sabotage is to recognize these patterns and understand what's driving them. And that brings us to the root causes of self-sabotage. Now that we understand what self-sabotage is, let's talk about why it happens. Wiest identifies several root causes, including fear, unresolved trauma, and limiting beliefs. Fear is one of the biggest drivers of self-sabotage. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of change. It all stems from the same place, the unknown. When we don't know what's on the other side of our actions, our brains fill in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. For example, let's say you're offered promotion at work. On the surface, this seems like a great opportunity. But if you're afraid of the added responsibility or worried you might not live up to expectations, you might sabotage your chances by procrastinating on the application or downplaying your achievements. Unresolved trauma is another major factor. If you've experienced pain in the past, your brain may be trying to protect you from experiencing it again. For example, if you've been hurt in a relationship, you might sabotage new relationships to avoid getting too close. This is a classic case of your brain prioritizing short-term safety over long-term growth. It's like building a wall around yourself to keep out potential pain. But in doing so, you also keep out love, connection, and joy. Finally, limiting beliefs play a huge role. These are the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of. If you believe you're not good enough, smart enough, or deserving of success, you'll unconsciously create situations that reinforce those beliefs. For instance, if you believe you're bad at public speaking, you might avoid opportunities to speak in front of others. And each time you avoid it, you reinforce a belief that you're not capable. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The good news is, once you identify the root causes of your self-sabotage, you can start to address them. And that's where the real transformation begins. So how do we turn self-sabotage into self-mastery? Wiest offers a step-by-step framework for doing just that. Step 1. Awareness. The first step is to become aware of your self-sabotaging behaviors. This means paying attention to the patterns in your life. Do you procrastinate? Do you avoid taking risks? Do you self-criticize? Once you're aware of these behaviors, you can start to understand what's driving them. For example, let's say you notice that you always put off starting new projects. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Is it failure? Judgment? The unknown? By identifying the underlying fear, you can start to address it. Step 2, acceptance. The next step is to accept that self-sabotage is a part of your journey. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's a sign that you're ready to grow. Instead of fighting against it, try to approach it with curiosity and compassion. For instance, if you catch yourself procrastinating, don't beat yourself up. Instead, ask yourself, what's really going on here? What am I trying to avoid? By approaching the situation with curiosity, you can uncover the deeper issues at play. Step 3, action. Finally, take action. This is where the real work happens. Start small, set achievable goals, and take consistent steps toward them. Each time you take action, you're proving to yourself that you're capable of change. For example, if you're afraid of public speaking, start by speaking up in small group settings. Then, gradually work your way up to larger audiences. Each small success will build your confidence and reinforce the belief that you can do it. Wiest also emphasizes the importance of self-compassion. Transforming self-sabotage into self-mastery isn't about being perfect. It's about progress. It's about showing up for yourself, even when it's hard. At its core, The Mountain Is You is a book about self-discovery. It's about realizing that the obstacles in your life aren't external. They're internal. The mountain isn't out there. It's within you. And here's the beautiful part. Once you realize that, you also realize that you have the power to climb it. You have the power to transform your self-sabotage into self-mastery. You have the power to create the life you've always wanted. The Mountain Is You, a story of transformation. Prologue, the call to climb. The mountain had always been there, a silent sentinel on the horizon of Emma's life. For years, she had avoided it, telling herself she wasn't ready, that the climb was too dangerous, too uncertain. But as she stood at the base of the mountain, her heart pounding in her chest, she realized that the mountain wasn't just a physical challenge. It was a reflection of everything she had been running from. The wind howled through the valley, carried with it whispers of doubt, memories of failures, and the weight of unfinished dreams. Emma tightened her grip on her backpack, her fingers brushing against the frayed edges of her old journal. Inside its pages were the remnants of a life half-lived. Scribbled goals, abandoned plans, and the faint traces of a woman who had once believed in her own potential. She had spent years running from this moment, telling herself she wasn't strong enough, that she wasn't ready. But deep down, she knew the truth. The real mountain wasn't made of rock and earth. It was inside her. Chapter 1, The Mountain Within. Emma's journey began long before she set foot on the mountain. It began in the quiet moments of her life, the moments when she felt the weight of her own expectations pressing down on her chest. She had always been her own harshest critic, her own greatest obstacle. The mountain was merely a physical manifestation of the battles she had been fighting within herself. Brianna Wiest, in her transformative book The Mountain Is You, teaches that self-sabotage isn't an external force. It's an internal battle. We are both the climber and the mountain. Every obstacle we face is a part of us, shaped by fear, past wounds, and limiting beliefs. The mountain is not here to defeat us. It exists to teach us how to rise. As Emma stood at the base of the mountain, she felt the weight of this truth settle over her. The climb ahead wasn't just about reaching the summit. It was about confronting the parts of herself she had been avoiding for years. It was about facing her fears, her doubts, and the story she had been telling herself about who she was and what she was capable of. Chapter 2, Recognizing the Shadows. As Emma began her ascent, she encountered her first challenge, self-doubt. The voice in her head whispered, "You're not strong enough. You failed before and you'll fail again." The words weighed her down, making every step feel impossible. Wiest explains that self-sabotage often disguises itself as protection. The brain, wired for survival, resists discomfort and uncertainty. Emma's fear of failure wasn't just a thought. It was a mechanism designed to keep her safe. But growth requires discomfort, and staying at the base of the mountain meant staying stuck. Emma paused, her breath coming in short gasps as she looked up at the path ahead. The mountain loomed large, its peak obscured by clouds. She felt small, insignificant, and utterly unprepared. But as she stood there, she realized that the voice in her head wasn't telling her the truth. It was merely echoing the fears she had carried with her for years. Chapter 3. The Weight of the Past. Halfway up the mountain, Emma found herself carrying an invisible load. Memories of past failures, rejection, and unresolved pain. She had spent years believing she wasn't good enough, smart enough, or deserving of success. The higher she climbed, the heavier these thoughts became. Wiest describes how unresolved trauma shapes our actions. If we've been hurt before, we might unconsciously create patterns that prevent us from experiencing that pain again. For Emma, this meant pushing away opportunities, avoiding risks, and convincing herself that she wasn't meant for greatness. As she climbed, Emma began to notice the ways in which her past was holding her back. She remembered the time she had turned down a promotion because she was afraid she wouldn't be able to handle the responsibility. She remembered the relationships she had sabotaged because she was afraid of being vulnerable. And she remembered the dreams she had abandoned because she was afraid of failing. Chapter 4. Breaking the Cycle. Determined to continue, Emma decided to face her fears head-on. Instead of running from them, she paused, took a deep breath, and acknowledged them. "I see you," she whispered, "but you don't control me." According to Wiest, awareness is the first step to transformation. When we recognize our self-sabotaging patterns, we regain power over them. Emma's decision to confront her fears was the beginning of her self-mastery. As she climbed, Emma began to replace doubt with belief, fear with courage, and hesitation with action. She learned to trust herself, to reframe failure as a lesson, and to celebrate progress rather than perfection. Chapter 5. The Climb to Self-Mastery. With each step, Emma grew stronger. She learned to navigate the rocky terrain of her own mind, to find footholds in the face of uncertainty, and keep moving forward even when the path was unclear. She began to see the mountain not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Wiest emphasizes that self-sabotage is not a life sentence. We have the ability to rewrite our stories, to dismantle limiting beliefs, and to step into our highest potential. The climb is difficult, but it is also the path to our greatest self. Conclusion. The view from the top. As Emma reached the summit, she looked back at the journey that had once seemed impossible. The mountain had not defeated her. It had transformed her. The same wind that once carried doubt now carried the promise of new beginnings. Wiest's message is clear. The mountain is not an enemy. It is a teacher, a mirror, and a guide. The obstacles we face are not here to stop us. They are here to help us rise. Emma's backstory. The roots of self-sabotage. Emma's journey up the mountain was not just a physical climb. It was a reckoning with her past. Her self-sabotaging patterns were deeply rooted in her childhood, relationships, and pivotal life events. To understand her climb, we must first understand the woman she was before she set foot on the mountain. Childhood, the seeds of doubt. Emma grew up in a small, quiet town where expectations were as rigid as the mountains that surrounded it. Her parents, well-meaning but emotionally distant, often praised her for her achievements, but rarely for who she was. "Good job, Emma," her father would say, glancing up from his newspaper. "But don't get too proud. There's always room for improvement." This constant pressure to be perfect planted the seeds of self-doubt. Emma learned early on that her worth was tied to her accomplishments. She became a high achiever, but beneath her success was a gnawing fear of failure. She carried this fear into adulthood, where it manifested as self-sabotage. Relationships, the cycle of abandonment. Emma's relationships were a reflection of her inner turmoil. She had a pattern of choosing partners who were emotionally unavailable, mirroring the dynamic she had with her parents. Her most significant relationship was with Mark, a charismatic but distant man who kept her at arm's length. When he left without explanation, Emma was devastated. She blamed herself, convinced that she wasn't enough to make him stay. This abandonment reinforced her belief that she was unworthy of love and success. She began to push people away before they could leave her, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of loneliness. Pivotal life events, the breaking point. The final straw came when Emma lost her job. She had poured her heart into her work, hoping it would fill the void left by her relationships. When she was laid off, she felt like a failure. She spent months in a fog of self-pity, avoiding friends and family, and sinking deeper into her own doubts. It was during this time that she found Brianna Wiest's book, The Mountain Is You. The words resonated with her, offering a glimmer of hope. She realized that her mountain wasn't just a metaphor. It was a call to action. She needed to confront her past, her fears, and her self-sabotaging patterns if she ever wanted to move forward. Philosophical and psychological insights. The nature of self-sabotage. As Emma climbed, she reflected on the philosophical and psychological insights that had shaped her understanding of self-sabotage. Brianna Wiest's teachings were her guide, but she also drew wisdom from other thinkers and traditions. Fear as a protective mechanism. Wiest explains that self-sabotage is often a form of self-protection. The brain, wired for survival, resists change because it perceives it as a threat. Emma's fear of failure wasn't just a thought. It was a survival mechanism designed to keep her safe. But as Carl Jung once said, what you resist persists. Emma realized that by avoiding her fears, she was only giving them more power. The role of trauma. Emma's unresolved trauma played a significant role in her self-sabotaging patterns. Psychologist Peter Levine's work on trauma helped her understand how past wounds can shape present behavior. Her fear of abandonment, for example, was rooted in her childhood experiences. By acknowledging this trauma, she began to see her patterns not as flaws, but as adaptations that had once served a purpose. The power of vulnerability. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability was a turning point for Emma. She realized that her fear of being vulnerable was keeping her from forming meaningful connections. Vulnerability is not weakness, Brown writes. It is our greatest measure of courage. Emma began to embrace vulnerability, allowing herself to be seen and heard in ways she never had before. The climb, challenges and triumphs. Emma's climb up the mountain was a metaphor for her inner journey. Each step brought new challenges, but also new opportunity for growth. The first ascent, confronting self-doubt. The first leg of the climb was steep and treacherous. Emma's self-doubt was her constant companion, whispering that she wasn't strong enough to make it. But as she climbed, she began to challenge these thoughts. She reminded herself of her past successes and the resilience that had carried her through difficult times. The rocky path, facing the past. Halfway up the mountain, Emma encountered a rocky path that forced her to slow down. It was here that she confronted the weight of her past. She journaled about her childhood, her relationships, and the moments that had shaped her. This process was painful, but it was also cathartic. She began to see her past not as a burden, but as a source of strength. The summit, a new perspective. As Emma neared the summit, the air grew thin, and the climb became even more challenging. But she pressed on, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose. When she finally reached the top, she was overcome with emotion. The view was breathtaking, but it was a journey that had transformed her. Supporting characters, mirrors, and guides. Emma's journey was not a solitary one. Along the way, she encountered other climbers who reflected different aspects of her own journey. Sarah, the perfectionist. Sarah was a fellow climber who, like Emma, struggled with perfectionism. Her fear of failure had kept her from pursuing her dreams. Through their conversations, Emma realized that perfectionism was just another form of self-sabotage. Together, they learned to embrace imperfection and celebrate progress over perfection. James, the survivor. James was a seasoned climber who had overcome incredible odds. His story of resilience inspired Emma to keep going, even when the climb felt impossible. He reminded her that the mountain was not just a challenge. It was an opportunity to discover her own strength. Themes of transformation, the human condition. Emma's journey was a microcosm of the human experience. Her struggles with fear, vulnerability, and self-sabotage are universal themes that resonate with us all. The nature of fear. Fear is a natural part of the human experience, but it doesn't have to control us. Emma learned to see fear not as an enemy, but as a teacher. It was her fear that had pushed her to climb the mountain in the first place. The power of vulnerability. Vulnerability is often seen as a weakness, but it is actually a source of strength. By allowing herself to be vulnerable, Emma was able to form deeper connections with others and with herself. The importance of self-compassion. Self-compassion was a recurring theme in Emma's journey. She learned to treat herself with the same kindness and understanding that she would offer a friend. This shift in perspective was key to her transformation. Practical tools and exercises applying the lessons. Emma's journey offers practical tools and exercises that readers can use to apply the lessons of the story to their own lives. Journaling prompts. What are the mountains in your life? What fears or doubts are holding you back? Reflect on a past failure. What did you learn from it? How can you reframe it as a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block? Mindfulness practices. Practice mindful breathing to calm your mind and body when you feel overwhelmed. Use body scans to identify where you hold tension and release it. Strategies for overcoming self-sabotage. Identify your self-sabotaging patterns. What triggers them? How can you respond differently? Set small, achievable goals to build confidence and momentum.